Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This is episode number 65, and this week we're reviewing the 2021 film Passing. So this is a pretty recent film, and I first heard about this because previously we had reviewed, what was last week's film? It was about the Vikings, Chris. I'm blanking on the name. The Northman.
Northman,
Who starred Alexander Skarsgård. And this film actually has Alexander Skarsgård in a more minor role in this film. But I was reading reviews, found the topic kind of interesting, and that's kind of why we chose this film. So, I kind of want to get your initial thoughts, Chris. What do you think of this film? Because the style is definitely very different.
I thought the style, obviously the black and white style, is definitely something that's not used often. It was interesting learning through some interviews that like a lot of people initially, when she pitched the project, told her like they liked the project, but get rid of the black and white. But she stuck with it. I think that shows some courage from the director.
Mm-hmm.
I think also the subject matter is something that I think society has touched upon throughout, like, and the mainstream level has touched upon here and there, but I definitely felt like, because it's definitely based off a book, that like in the African American community, this is definitely something that is probably more discussed than, let's just say, other
sure
communities. And the title, just like the book, is very symbolic of that, right? Like the term passing, right? And like that's definitely like a term that is used, in our culture, but definitely in the African American community. So I thought that was all interesting. We'll dive into some of the nitty-gritty details of the film, but I thought on the whole, I enjoyed something that was refreshing in terms of a topic. Again, we'll talk about some of the other problems maybe the film had, but that I did like. I thought the performances were really strong, actually. And I also thought the black and white in the end really added to the film, because like I think it was, I think you were supposed to kind of infer like how dark they looked, but like based on the that color palette, but that's left to the audience discretion based off your own probably life experiences and what you know of the subject too. And I thought on the whole it's a solid film. I think there were some details that it hurt it to make it maybe a great film, but I honestly thought like these kind of films should be encouraged, because they add to, I think, to the art form and to our society's conversation on the subject. I don't know, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything you said. I just wanted to add that you pointed this out. This movie was actually based off of a book that was, I believe, written, in 1929 novel. So it was interesting because it's just interesting to me that it took, I guess, this long for this film to be made, because it was based off a novel. But kudos to Rebecca Hall. Thought she did a pretty good job. I really like the style choice with it being black and white, because that definitely left it to like the audience member to try to decipher certain things, and it kind of made things a little bit ambiguous. Sorry, I couldn't come up with a word. Because you couldn't really tell, what is their tone level. This film really touched upon different, definitely like about colorism and how big an issue that was, especially back in the 1920s, right? And so I thought it was a really good choice that they went with the black and white direction, even though they were, like you were saying, doing research. The director was advised not to go in that direction. I did think the performances from the actors were phenomenal, and the moments that I enjoyed the most, I think we talked about this off air, were between Tessa Thompson's character and her interactions with her husband. There was a lot of sort of subtlety and nuance within there, and a lot of things that I think it was kind of left up to the audience to try to infer between their dynamics. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know. Is there anything you wanted to touch upon specifically, or any themes?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go through one of the first early powerful scenes with Claire's husband and Renee. I do think we should there's obviously high level themes, but before we get to those, I think that's a good scene. I also think it's good to talk about maybe the relationship between Rini and her husband. That's also a lot of things there. But going to that first opening scene with the cafe and the
Can I say?
shop.
Oh, so you talking about
Okay.
the opening scene of the movie?
Yeah, because they
Yeah, go
meet
ahead.
right, and then she meets her husband, who blatantly says I'm not going to repeat his lines, but dislikes
It's
black people.
very racial, racial terms, and it was not subtle in any way.
And the actress that plays Rini, I will say this: it's all like here. Kudos to subtlety. You can see how uncomfortable she feels in that room at that moment.
Yeah, wouldn't you? I was
uncomfortable.
Yeah,
no. Yeah, because you see it in her mind switch from like, okay, she's lying to her husband, but maybe he's just indifferent, right? Yeah. But he vehemently says, "I dislike black people."
Oh, he didn't say I dislike. He says I hate, basically.
Yeah. I don't like using that. I don't like using that.
Yeah, it was brutal, right?
And so then you see her like her body just curl up, and that's like great acting because it's all nonverbal.
Of course, yeah.
It's nonverbal, but also an understanding of like something like understanding of like the source material in a sense. So like she understands that like somebody who was in that situation would react that way. Maybe she has in the past. I don't know. But like I give credit there to understanding also like contextually of like how somebody in that time period would feel in that moment, you know. I think now
oh, go ahead.
Last point is like I give credit because I think sometimes when we make movies today about the past, we tend to have like a revisionist lens sometimes. So is that good?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to point out, like, even before that, so like the very opening scene when Rini and Claire sort of meet, it was just, I found it kind of interesting because I don't know if you picked up on this, but Rini almost felt like she was trying to, I don't know if she was, there was so much nonverbal interaction in the opening scenes and in a lot of this movie that I thought was really interesting. And I couldn't tell, she was definitely in an area that wasn't part of Harlem, right? Because it was mentioned in her interactions with Claire that, you know, she still lives up in Harlem. So it was, I couldn't quite tell if she was, she being Rini was trying to pass in the beginning. And because she seemed almost like very uncomfortable, like she'd be found out. But then it was interesting because then she sees Claire as someone who she perceives as having as being a little bit lighter skin. And clearly she recognizes that that lady is trying to pass as well. But it's almost like she had a little bit of judgment or resentment to her from the get-go, or like judging her like, how can you be trying to pass when she was kind of doing the same thing? And that sort of interaction I found very interesting. It kind of set the tone between their dynamics.
Yeah, we're not really explicitly told, but it seems like their relationship had like, it's a friendship, but there was a lot of baggage too.
Tons resentment in a way.
Yeah, and what was interesting is it's actually one of the more powerful lines of the film, in my opinion, where I forgot who said it actually, but it might have been Claire who says like, we're all passing for something.
No, that was I know exactly who. That was Rini's husband.
Okay. And the reason that really hit with me as a theme is because I don't know if it's true, but maybe how was it portrayed, but I had this sense that Rini was like lesbian, or at least like was not, you know, she was like a dutiful mother and wife, but there was something just off at times. But we'll get into those details later. But also how like they talk to each other a little bit, like with even Claire, like some of her interactions with Rini felt very like just not like a normal friendship, it seemed like, but you know. But I
but you don't know, like I see where you're coming with that, especially some of her reactions. But I don't know if she didn't necessarily wish she wasn't, if Rini wasn't Claire and vice versa. I think that was a lot. They both seem like they wish they could be in each other's positions at times. I don't know if you came out with the same sense of it.
Yeah, I just, that being dropped so early in the film really like clicked in my brain throughout that, like, you know, even though this is a story about class and race, that there are also other little I guess, like dynamics to it too.
Things that people were hiding.
Yeah, it's just like when we see other archetypes of people who are, when I word passing it, but I like the word faking, but like faking being a good husband, but you know that they're having five affairs, you know, or they're faking that they're a good, they're a good father, but they really just hit their kids, you know, like there is that element to that human nature of it that I was like, oh, it's a very substantial line in my opinion in the film. But yeah, I just, we're already digging deep on that scene, but I did find that scene to be like a great way to start the film, a great way to get you hooked. It doesn't last, but it definitely, like, when I saw that, I was like, this is, in my mind, I was like, this is gonna be intense. But continue.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think it was a lot of the I think what made this film so good is its sort of subtleties, or you are trying to left it to interpret or decipher exactly the little nuggets that they were trying to drop and exactly what they meant. Like you said with that line, they put it in very early when you first meet Brian. It was Reenie's husband, and you see their interactions, and there were a lot of like nonverbal cues where it's like, when I was like watching them on screen, you're like trying to figure out exactly like what's going on with their relationship, because at first it seems like kind of healthy, but then you could tell there's certain strains there as well. It's part of why I found it interesting, or I think that or why Reenie, I think, wish she was in Claire's position, is kind of the idea of, she really didn't, she being Reenie, really didn't like it when Brian was talking about, a lot of the brutality that was going on against Black people at that time, when he was talking about, some of the news stories to their kids. And she's like, don't do that. Don't talk about, all these violent acts to them. And to an extent, it almost felt like she didn't want to acknowledge the reality that she really was Black. That's kind of like what I took away from it, but I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, that was interesting dynamic. Like, I mean, it's
almost like wishful thinking in a way.
Yeah, I think also, wishful thinking, or just maybe like trying to avoid it, like out of sight, out of mind type of mentality.
Right, and I can tell that very much frustrated her husband.
Yeah. But even like you said, like you said, it was strained, right? There was even the interaction on the mirror, right, where they have a little argument. I think I think she's getting ready because I guess one thing she does as a hobby is host parties, it looks like.
Social
and Claire, Claire wants to be part of that. But like with her husband, with Reenie's husband, Brian, like at times they just had, like you said, like interactions where it just felt strange, like not just that one, but like I said, the one in the mirror where I think she says like, why are you waiting for me to change? Step out the door, like little just passive aggressive moves, And remember in the car as well, where they're talking about, do we want to move to South America? I think they talk about that briefly. Yeah. And then they she says no. And then, they're arguing about that. And then I could tell that it's like, it's interesting. You see this with couples that are functional, but they are, to use something that you say all the time, they could use some therapy, right? The window, right? Like, remember he's like, oh, it's called, leave it up. And then she's like, oh, I want it down now. And it's like those little things I've seen, like even in like personal life of like,
and to further your point, I've seen this a lot where people have like a strained issues within their marriage or their relationship. And then they think that they'll do like one grand gesture, like move to South America or go on vacation somewhere. And like, that's more of a temporary fix rather than something that's going to cure things that are like more fundamentally wrong or going wrong.
Exactly. And obviously this is capturing a different era where divorce and separation wasn't as
it was taboo at that point.
Yeah, mainstream. Because it crossed my mind. I was thinking like, if I had met
I wouldn't put it as mainstream. I would put it as taboo at that during that
taboo. Era. The wrap up my point is like, I was thinking like, if I met this couple today, I would probably be like, this relationship probably needs some work. There's cracks here that are not really being filled, and as time goes on, they might grow further,
Right. So I'm
Sorry,
curious.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, I'll let
I
you.
was gonna say because it was gonna be a good segue. I was saying, like, and you see this clearly with her insecurity around Brian and Claire's relationship.
Right.
But I'll let you if you
So
have something else.
I was going to ask you, right, because Brian said that early on that he wasn't really attracted to Ruth, right? Because he's like, I prefer, I don't really like people who are. What was his line? He said, "Well, she looks pretty good for someone who would be like a white lady." I was like, it just kind of made me laugh, like the way you phrased it. He's like, "No, I'm more into a black woman." But then later on, you kind of see that he gets a little bit closer with Claire. So I'm just curious, do you think it was just friendly or there was something more there?
So what's interesting is that initially, guys, remember his arc, right? Initially,
Yeah, go ahead.
he only knows Reenie's perspective, right? So remember, he reads the letter at the bed, and he's just like, "This is like so over the top," and he just thinks it's that, right? Actually, it does read like a little bit like a love letter, which kind of made me think about like what happened.
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
Past. It was like I wouldn't write my friend that kind of letter.
No, but the way women interact as friends is different from how dudes do as well.
That's true, but I do feel like it was.
No, I know there's something more there, but I just had to throw that out there for you.
So then, like, he remember initially also, he's also like, remember, like, she says, "Would you want to? Brian's the best dancer. Dance with me." He's like, "I'll find you a different partner."
Mm-hmm.
But I think what ends up happening over time, and maybe this is Claire's power, or maybe she's just good at this. Some women are good at this. I think she's able to charm her way into him shifting his opinion, because he is pure. I think it's lost in the details, maybe, but it's like he was a bit standoffish initially, and then by later on, he was like you said, it's very chummy. I'll answer the question in the end if I thought there was anything to it. But I thought that was an interesting Claire progression, how like she has this ability, and the other guy, I forgot the guy's name. Remember the one that Reenie hosts the party for, the rich, I don't know if he's an aristocrat. Hugh, yeah, Hugh. He also makes note of this, saying like, he has that line, right? She's like, he's like, it gets really old to hear how woe is me, I'm the victim, but then he also says, but I can't help but be captivated.
Right.
And I think this plays on Reenie's mind, because I think she sees that as Claire enters her world, she's becoming the star when she wants to be the star. And then to answer your question with Brian,
she wants to be her.
Yeah. And I think it's not just her in terms of the whiteness, even though I think her character infers that like the reason she has this bravado is because of it. It's the same people that say the same logic of like, oh, if I was white, I'd be rich, I mean, we heard this sometimes on, certain interviews. Yeah. And it's because they think one trait makes a person, right? When it could be more complex than that. Maybe it plays a factor, but there's just no way one trait is why she's the way she is, right? And yeah, I found that whole dynamic very interesting. Now, to answer your question, based on the film's evidence, I think Reenie had I would say, what's the term I'm going to try to use here? I think some good reason to be fearful, but I think Brian, the character, at any point in the film, I don't think he ever really got physical with her. I think I
didn't say that. I was asking, do you think he was actually more attracted to her as the film went on?
Yes, but not because of her whiteness. I think because of her personality.
Why? What part of the personality?
I would say just flirty, charming, and just seems like, even if she's faking it, like very full of life,
Yeah,
Reenie comes like, look, I like her character, but her character does come across as very cold,
Yes, I think those reasons are, but I think it was more. My whole thing is I always found this interesting because I think Claire really envied or wanted to be like Reenie, and Reenie really envied and wanted to be like Claire. And why I think that's important within that dynamic is that I think that Claire really, even though she was passing as white, she really was yearning or wanted to, she even said she wanted to come back to Harlem, and it wouldn't be the worst thing if her husband found out that she wasn't, if she wasn't white. And I think she was really gravitating, like as she began hanging around with Reenie and Brian more, She really wanted to get back and get more in touch with her community. She really wanted to strive and become black again, but like more like culturally, right? Whereas with Rini, it seemed like she just didn't want to, like any issues that were plaguing her kids or like being black, she didn't want to like really talk about. It's almost like she wished she was more like culturally going in the opposite direction, more becoming white. And I think that really her husband, I kind of saw that in a way because he's getting frustrated that she would not want to talk about, some of the violent things that were going on against black people at that time. And even and what also struck me is the way that Rini really treated her mates, who were like clearly much on the, in terms of colorism, they were much darker than she was, and she really treated them like lower class people. Whereas with Claire, at one point when Rini comes home with the groceries, Claire's out there, talking and becoming friends with the mates. So like really understanding, getting in touch. And then later on, when they're all going to go out to play cards, Brian and Claire are talking, and Rini's a little irritated because one of the maids had to like call in sick, and because she had like some family emergency. And Brian looks at her like, dude, like she needs to spend time with her family too sometimes. And I could tell it was this shift of like Claire, gravitating more towards black culture, whereas Rini seems to be separating himself. And I think that kind of drew Brian more towards Claire as he started to get to know and like be around her more.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about both of them.
Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? So I think it was more the cultural pool.
Yeah. Rini is a little more. I have to take more of a guess here, but Claire is, to me, is much more straightforward in the sense that like she's definitely of the archetype of somebody that to try to explain why I think she wants to get back to her black culture. I'll just say that is like often people who are definitely like mixed usually. Like one of the things that I've read a few books on this, like they have a hard time like finding their place in the sense of like, are they one ethnicity or the other? And like often the answer is very personal, unfortunately, if you're an audience listener. But like Claire is, I think, trying to like she knows she can pass as white, but she feels like she's happier when she is with black people. And I think for Rini, it's more of a question of I want my social status to be like how the white people have it. Like I want basically a maid who's always on call, who misses like everything with their kids. I don't care if you're whatever sick, and or I have a backup option, because even though her husband's a doctor and is well off for the time period, she knows that there's a level up,
Sure, yeah.
And
they still live in Harlem, which is nice at that time, but there's nicer neighborhoods and boroughs, I'm sure, of Manhattan at that point.
Yeah, and to your point, you see this also to the fact that like she loves talking and hosting parties for Hugh, who represents this.
Yeah. Yep.
Who represents this, let's call it like socialite aristocratic lifestyle. And that's what she yearns to have. And I think you're right. What's off-putting for Brian is that like, fine, he's not going to say no to some good wine and dance, but he's much more grounded in the reality that he is a black man in America in the early 20th century, and it's you can't be so delusional to believe that,
you can escape that reality.
You're going to be truly accepted in those circles.
Sure. Yeah, 100% agree.
While Claire can walk both worlds, which is probably her jealousy point.
Yes.
Until
I would agree. But I think, at this point in the film, I think Claire is yearning or wanting to, get more in touch with her, with black culture.
Yeah, which, brings up that question of like, and this is the other opposite, right? Like the one that I think is only talked about in certain high level shows, but like, are you truly still black if you have been dabbling on the other side,
Why do you just speak in code? Just say what show we're referring to.
I like speaking in code. I like speaking in code. You know me.
Talk about it, bro. Yeah, so what we're referring to is Atlanta. And so when I was watching this film, it really reminded me.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I want you to continue. But you know me long enough. I like to speak in code.
Yeah, so. I know, but don't do that. Don't do that for our audience or whoever might actually watch this. Yeah, so what we're talking about is like is the show Atlanta. Why this film really stuck with me, and we're both big fans of the show, is it really reminded us of a couple episodes um, that they produced throughout the years in different seasons. One specifically, the most obvious one was in I think it was like episode 3 of, or I'm sorry, episode 9 of season 3, where essentially the whole episode is in black and white. The main character, you think he's white, but he's really not. He's actually mixed in real life. And his dad is black, but he makes it kind of like unknown. And and so he tries to pass as white the whole time, like his whole friend group is white, and he's a high school kid, but he's poor. And then which was the whole concept of the episode was wild and funny, because then someone who's very rich comes to town, and he's a black man who's played by Kevin Samuels, and he basically comes and makes an announcement that he wants to give back to his school, and he's like I'm going to pay for college for everyone here, and everyone starts cheering, and then he's like, if you're black. And then like all the black people are like having a great time, and all the other kids are like, oh shoot. And then they basically have a series of tests of questions where you can apply to see if you are if Kevin Samuels' character and several other people who are basically the judges, they will ask you questions, and if you get the answers right based on their liking, then you will be quote unquote like certified as being black. It was a very wild concept, but I thought it was cool because it was very like contextual, or it was very nuanced in terms of like how they were approaching this kind of subject matter in different ways. You know, if it benefits you financially, people will kind of shift their motives.
Yeah, but
anyway, sorry, we're going off, but why is, I think this film actually might have inspired or influenced the style of that specific episode of Atlanta, and it could have been some others as well.
But yeah, great points. But the reason I brought it up is because, and I think this shows maybe the limitations of the director, because her backstory is that her ancestors were black, but she doesn't look black at all.
No,
because like I said, is again, I give credit to that creative team behind Atlanta, is that they take a premise that, like, because this is probably the more, it's fine, it's not that mainstream, but this is probably the more mainstream premise, right? Like Claire can walk both worlds. Well, there's risk, but she walks both worlds until she's caught. We'll get into that. But Atlanta points out that like it's not so easy, because people who are like Claire will often be ostracized or, you know, shunned.
Yeah, it's often ostracized from both groups, or you got to pick one.
Exactly. It's and you know, we saw that Atlanta episode what happened to his character, but you know, and I think if I had to, again, you know, I can't really critique the book or the film, but I think that's one angle that I think even back then in the book, I don't read the book, I don't know if they explore that, but if, let's just say the movie tries its best to be truthful, that is something that I think, you know, was it like, I find it interesting that it wasn't touched upon, because that's very like,
you can only go so far, and this was also written in the 20s, so it was a different time, and I think these dynamics have shifted over the decades. Right. Whereas like the dynamics that go on today are a little bit different than, like, I mean, racism was far more out in the open at that point in time, if that makes sense. Certain dynamics have generally shifted. I'm not saying that racism is absolved by any means today. It's just you don't really have, you know, like with Brian's frustration, he's like, dude, some dude was publicly lynched. You don't really have that out in the open by like typical mobs like you did back then. But yeah, like dynamics have kind of shifted for today, and so like, but they kind of have evolved and changed in a way. Like to your point, it's like Atlanta really went in depth in different ways, where it's like, you know, he's like, just because you look, it was really interesting when they talked about like, you know, actually having your skin tone of being like dark or light versus like, are you culturally in tune with what that represents in a way? Or is it that oftentimes that culture gets too narrowly defined, and you know, being black, you can be like into like anything. You don't just have to be that one thing. I think that's where the sort of subtleties or nuance of Atlanta really came in. But yeah, it's a difficult conundrum, I would say, for kids who are or people who are more mixed today, because those cultural lines get blurred a lot. There was even a hip hop song by speaking of Atlanta, the guy who played Blue Blood, the rapper, his name is Earl Sweatshirt. He had a line in the song earlier in his career where he was like, I'm too black for the white kids and too white for the blacks. And he goes rapping about like a little bit how, some of the difficulties with that, because you don't really fit into that box.
Yeah, and you see this a lot, even like in South America, right? Like I remember meeting an Ecuador, well, he's American, but from Ecuadorian descent, that he looked no different than like yourself or some other people that would have gone to our high school, But he was, he spoke Spanish, and his parents probably were truly, I mean, they are truly Ecuadorian. But he is able to probably, unless you know his last name, like probably blend in very well.
Well, let's go with the one that really looks like me, if not even more Scottish or Irish, Canelo.
Yeah.
I mean, I have some friends who like, what the heck? Like, this dude, I mean, you get Canelo here and he's trying to speak English. He can barely speak like a lick of it. And he looks like he should be like, straight from the Highlands of Scotland, but, culturally, he's just born and raised in Guadalajara. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, that's what he knows, and that's what he is.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic, especially, and I think in America it's going to become more and more a theme, because I remember reading a couple of years ago that, like, obviously it's not like the majority.
Well, it's
but the percentage of like mixed race couples it's like the highest it's ever been in our history. So this theme will become more prevalent as we get older, like the generation behind.
I want to say I find it interesting when people talk about these and they act like these are just issues that go on in the U.S. or America. Because I remember we're talking to me the other day about how when you went to go visit the Netherlands, someone asked like what your descent was. Just for the audience members, like, we're both like culturally mixed, but you're like Vietnamese and Mexican. But you went over to what was it, Amsterdam? Someone asked you where you're from, and you're like, oh, I'm from the U.S. No, where are your ancestors from? You're like Mexican, Vietnam, and you're like, oh, so that's where you are. And you're like, yeah, but dude, like, I grew up in California. That's what I am. Yeah, it was like, you're like, I don't have. I'm not
culturally. I'm not culturally Vietnamese, and there's some mixed.
More culturally Mexican, but yeah.
Yeah, and even then, I would never say I'm Mexican. Like, because I understand what Mexican means. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like, that's a discredit actually to the other people too.
But that's my point. I was like, a lot of this stuff is way more complicated than people make it out to be, and a lot of ignorance that comes out of this isn't just from specifically Americans. It's people all over the world. Sorry, that was just a point, because I've heard people talk about Europe sometimes. I'm like, dude, they're just backward in many ways.
This is an American film, and also I've only seen the American data on like Gen Z. So Gen Z is the most diverse generation America's produced, because and I think this will be a snowball effect, because again, it has the highest. They're the generation that, when their parents had kids, the highest mix of like interracial couples, which is again not like 50%, but it's the highest usually in our country's history. So it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves actually as a topic. And I think actually this topic will be explored more, is what I'm trying to say.
Anyway, let's get back to the film a little bit, because we kind of got lost in some tangents related, but either way, I do find it interesting the sort of draw, or like going back to the dynamic between Brian and Claire, is very interesting, because I know this is based on the book, but this is sort of an issue you hear a lot with, some like black dating podcasts, or like issues that some people bring up. It's that, oftentimes it gets critiqued with, or stereotyped, that black men will tend to want to date people who are either like lighter skinned or white, kind of like outside the race. And I think that's also like a dynamic or pull that was kind of interesting, that still kind of persists today. And I'm sure it was kind of present back then as well. Or that sort of like colorism dynamic, or dating outside of your ethnic group. Going to your point that you were talking about how Gen Z is the most diverse, like I'm sure, like racially speaking.
Yeah, you also see this with the Asian community, right? That's another topic. It's actually
what is it? It's Asian women are the most likely to date outside of their race, and then it's black men.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because this is something that I know of, but because I'm not engrossed in the Asian community here, but I do know that it's an anxiety because I see discussions on it online and also even in my own personal life.
Personally,
So
yeah, I've seen a couple of pods talking about it, but generally where you see is a lot of critiques from Black women about this. But I have seen some from Asian men as well, and those are also the two groups that I think are least likely to marry outside of their ethnic groups.
yeah,
It's very interesting, that kind of dynamic there.
it is. Yeah, I can't really speak to it because I'm not an expert, but
Yeah.
but it's
No,
definitely
it's just more in like pop culture or sort of cultural norms. It's just something that I've seen out there, and I'm not Black, but from afar, or someone who's white, it is interesting dynamic to see played out.
yeah, and yeah, all I can say on that topic is it is interesting, but like it's hard for me to
Fully
quantify it
get into
because,
it, yeah.
but mainly because like look,
And
like I'm
also
not, it's not my
that being
social circles. Yeah.
right. But that being said, even within those two groups, even though they're Asian women or Black men are the most likely to date outside, they still overwhelmingly by numerical standards marry within their ethnicities.
Yeah,
So
that's still the most common thing.
yeah, amongst every group, you're most likely to marry within your own ethnicity. So,
yeah, but what to going back to the film in a sec, but I'll just say
Yeah.
one thing is that the reason the study or this report caught my eye is because what you just said has been the norm, but what happens as this gets diluted more? Like what? Like
well,
you know,
I can't
yeah.
look into future trends. I'm just talking about the present moment.
Yeah, which no, I mean it was a question posed by the article, and I always remember that because I was like, that's true. Like how we define groups now could be completely different in like just 20 years from now.
Well, yeah, and Gen Z's might be the most racially diverse group, but they're also the smallest generation we've ever had. So I don't know how
Sorry,
the smallest generation we've ever had. So who knows what dynamics?
I don't worry. I meet a lot of Gen Z. I'm gonna do my part.
Okay, I know, but
Elon's an inspiration on that front. I guess.
Right, but what I'm saying is we don't know what dynamics will play out in the future. That's all.
Don't worry, I'm on my case, Mr. President. Anyways,
Who's Mr. President? Joe Biden, or are you talking about Elon? Now I'm confused.
I'll let you determine that.
Everyone's gonna look at like everyone can infer a lot based on your to the moon hat and your
to the moon. Anyways, going back to now the final stretch of the film. So, before we get to there, it connects to the ending, but like I like how they use again like symbolism and some foreshadowing. Here, foreshadowing was obvious, but I liked it when the pot fell over and it cracked, and this will relate later.
Shattered.
Yeah, but basically,
what did she say? She's like, I've been looking for a way to get rid of that pot. Like, wow, that was very telling.
No, but even the pot that was on the window that fell off it broke in the
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot which pot you were talking about.
Yeah, the one that broke was like, it was see that the pot that was out the window, I think that was foreshadowing for obviously the ending scene. But the pot where she was holding and it shattered was just it represented how she was feeling. She was boiling and then boom, it burst, because again, all her emotions came out. But anyways, obviously to get to maybe the final sequence, the husband ends up finding out that basically his wife isn't white, which sets him off. And Rini figures this out subtly, like through facial expressions, because she's they run through each other. She tries calling her, which was interesting.
She did, but then she didn't follow up.
And it speaks to her like inner conflict with Claire. Like, I don't hate her, but I don't love her. It's like, I think we all could speak to this kind of complicated,
or it's a love-hate.
Or it's a love-hate. Yeah, exactly. Like, I think we all can speak to like people that were like, yeah, they're cool, but like
something I don't like about them. Yeah.
Something that just like I only can take so much doses, because I think as Claire encroached in her lifestyle, at first it was fine. It was just a little bit like a taste, like like one shot, one shot of booze, but then when it became like, wait, she's basically trying to be part of my social group fabric. because even I think she even got a little miffed when like her kids even preferred hanging out with her.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so she just felt her world was just crumbling, and she's like, "Wait, this person who I don't hate her, but like I don't really want her around. Like it's basically taking over. Like, it just drove her up a
And
wall.
at the same time, she was jealous of her.
Exactly. It's very like. I'll give this. I bet the book is really good because that just captures so many human emotions there.
Yeah.
It's so human, and you know me, I'm a big on that in films. It's so human. So
the humanism. I mean, I thought that the character personalities and development was just very good within each one. Like I was like they're very complex, which I liked. Except for what's his name, John, Claire's husband, because he's just a racist jerk.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I think he was playing his role.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we get to this final stretch where John confronts or is trying to confront Claire, getting to this party, and you know everybody's like, "What's going on?" And then I like how they did the editing because I think the book was also supposed to be ambiguous, but basically there is this. There was a tussle. I don't know. It's up to everybody's interpretation of like, and I want to hear yours. Did she fall on her own? Did Rini push her? Did he, trip and, she got so scared.
Or did she like think that she was going to save him and decide not to save her? Yeah. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Like she thought like, oh, like she'll pull, like you said, there's just so many layers to it. Yeah.
I don't know.
And then before we get to that speculation, I just want to wrap it with like she falls, dies. Rini's distraught. We can argue how believable that was. The husband also is just sitting there, and then I think they followed as like I don't know if the movie says this, but I think the book does it. It goes under like
it's accidental death.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I think either way, Rini has some culpability. Now, did she push her, or did she actually just like could have saved her but didn't? It's hard to tell. Like to the extent of her culpability, I would say that's my interpretation.
Yeah, my interpretation is that she didn't push her, but she didn't try to save her. But I do think her emotions were kind of real after the fact because I think it hit her that
she could have.
That like it's kind of like when somebody passes away that you had beef with, but then you realize that like now that the person's dead,
yeah, it's regret.
It was kind of like in the grand scheme of things insignificant, and I think that's why she was having such an emotional reaction because I think it dawned on her that fact that like, oh, like this is how it should have ended. There was a chance still. But yeah, there's just a lot of people have their own theories, right? That she did push, or the husband did push her. It wasn't really an accident. And
I don't think it was an accident. No,
or she just fell, like thinking like it's over. Like I got like this is there's no way out. Like everybody's got their. I'm just saying them just for the sake of the pod. Yeah. I just told you my theory. So, but it's just interesting how everybody has different kind of angles on this,
Sure. I think that's also like these little leave it to interpretation. I think they're obviously the most thought provoking, but I think they're oftentimes they're like the best way to end films.
Well, I think it's because I think the book and the movie's challenging you, the viewer, to make your own theory, and your own theory will be based on obviously how you think, right? How you view the film, how did you analyze it, but also probably your personal opinion of the characters, right? Sure. If you're somebody that really thought like, oh yeah, Rini was right, she should have pushed her, or yeah, whatever, like she didn't have to save her, or like you really disliked the husband, you're gonna convince yourself that he was super racist and pushed her, and they're just trying to cover up because in that time period, like who you're gonna believe,
Right. Well, they don't want to cause more harm or damage to themselves.
Exactly. Like they'll just shut up and say whatever they need to say. So there's just a lot of like it's true. It's like I said, it's interpretive, but also like based off your own thought process and your own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm somebody that actually liked a lot of the characters, so I tried to view it like through the evidence I saw in the film, and I just think that she didn't push, but she didn't do anything to save her because she was that conflicted about it.
Yeah, that's how I viewed it too.
But it was interesting reading some other people's takes. I thought that was kind of fascinating. But yeah, that was the final stretch. I don't know if you want to go back and review any particular theme or topic, but
no, I think it was good. Do you want to give your final thoughts?
Yeah, I will.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So as much as it was great, this film thematically and the performances, one of the issues I did have with this film was kind of like the pacing and the, use your word, cadence, because there was, outside of the first 30 minutes or maybe 40, let's say 40, I tried to watch it, continue it. And there was many times where I was just like, oh, this film is wrapping up. And I would hit pause and it would be like still like 25 more minutes. And this happened to me
40 minutes. Yeah.
This would happen to me a few times. And I'm like, is this movie dragging on? So I didn't read the books. Maybe the book is more of a slow burner and stuff, but I think films this is the reason why you can't always adapt perfectly, because they're not books. Right. And I'm not saying every book has to be a page turner, but they can play with pacing a little bit different. And this film, I think it lacked a bit of that, because I always find it a bit of a yellow flag when I feel like this film is just dragging on a little bit. I'm like, because outside of the themes we talked about, like there was little character things we could dissect, like between, the husband and wives and friends and whatever. But like for the most part, we get what the theme is in the first 30 minutes. What's the conflict, right? Is the identity issue and being caught. And at times it felt like the movie was like dragging its feet a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then let's be honest, you get to the ending sequence and it happens pretty quick.
So
it just
quick,
happens
so fast. I'm like, whoa, like
it's like 2 minutes. I'm like, okay, so we're here doing a drag a feet movie, and then the last 2 minutes is boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, it's like I'm talking like this. All of a sudden, here we go now. I'm like, whoa,
whoa. Oh, like you gotta.
It's kind of honestly, it kind of felt like a roller coaster. It was such a slow incline at many times. Then once you got to the end, you're at the top, and it's just a free fall.
And then it's over. Yeah. So that was probably my biggest problem with the film. I think other than that, I didn't have too many complaints or gripes. I thought all the performances were good. I mean, Claire's husband really couldn't do much. He had to play a specific role. I did find Hugh's character to be kind of disgusting. But that's just
disgusting and interesting at the same time.
Yeah, but that's just a personal take, because I don't really like those kind of people in general. But
very egotistical.
Yeah. But besides that, I thought the film was very strong. It carried its weight in the topic. I thought it's a good viewing. I would recommend it to people, especially who are not versed in this topic or tackling this topic. It's a good way to get entry. I will say this though, like I feel like a lot of people after the first 40 minutes are gonna fall asleep, unfortunately. So it's like, I was conflicted because I want to give it credit for its strengths, but the weaknesses is pretty stark. So I ended up going with a 7 out of 10.
Boy, you are ruthless.
Wait, I'm always ruthless now.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, in terms of negatives, I totally agree. About like, yeah, when we were talking about this off pod, I kind of related to like rap, where it's like you can have, like, if you think a rap song is really good, it's like it's got great flow from like the artist. It could have great lyrics. It could have a great beat, but if the cadence is off, in terms of the timing, it just doesn't quite feel right. And that's kind of how at times it felt like with this film, where it's like, I'd be like, okay, like it's pretty good. Like really good actually at times. And then I'd pause it and I'd be like 40 minutes in, and it's like, I still have another 50 minutes. Like this is felt like it's been dragging on for quite a bit. What I will say for the strengths, the acting was phenomenal. I thought the non-verbal acting by a lot of the actors was just great. Like you could get a lot of emotion in certain scenes just reading their expressions. Like those little subtleties I think are phenomenal, and you don't see that very often in many films today. Like really great non-verbal acting, like I saw in this film. I did like we've talked about earlier in the film. I like the black and white style choice, and I got to give credit to the director because this is her first film. I thought she did. This is a pretty good job for it being your first feature film in like a directing space, and hopefully, like as she does more projects, she'll get better with some of the shortfalls of this film. That being like the cadence, and and in future projects, hopefully those will be shored up. But for me personally, I gave this film an 8.5. I think the also other thing is I don't know how often I could rewatch this film. It was too slow. The topic is like pretty heavy, and we've rehashed that this and different other these topics that were presented in this film in like other shows and mediums that we've seen.
Yeah. I'm looking at my scores, and you're right. I'm ruthless, dude.
Yeah, you. I was like, dude. I was like, some of this is like aspects of this film were phenomenal, and you're like, too slow. -3. I'm like, jeez, bro.
No, because like the best rom-com I've ever watched.
No, but unless it's Mozart, you're like, I gotta give this film a 6.
No, because I'm looking at like just some old scores, and it's like the best rom-com film I've ever seen. I put it at a 6.5. I was like, dang, dude. The 500 Days of Summer. I was like,
are you for real?
That like I love myself, dude. That's a good analytical mind. Don't get caught in the
it's
moment,
not. It's you are like what is it? There are several schools are right. So like how they say like certain schools it's like very easy to get like certain grades, and some schools it's harder. So like their grade inflate. So like Stanford University. Sorry to throw this university under the bus, but I've heard, or like other schools, not necessarily Stanford, but like certain Ivies, they tend to be grade inflators. So they don't like giving like a lot of their students like below a B. Whereas like there's certain other schools that are grade suppressors, where it's like if you get like a 2.7, there's a school, it's not St. Augustine, it's like a really small school in like Massachusetts, where if you get a 2.7, so a B- average, you're already like cum laude. Where it's like with a lot of other schools, it's like you have to have a 3.5. Like that's how much, like how hard it is to get like really good GPAs there. And that's why I'm like, that's like you're the grade suppressor. I'm closer to the grade inflator, but not quite. I try to be in there. But yeah, it's just interesting because we got to rank adjust.
You're definitely an inflator with that one film. Where is it called again?
Which one?
I'm trying to find it.
Oh, Absentia. Yeah, that's just number 3. I called that out many times. Oh
man, that's like the ultimate. Like talk about inflator.
Well, what did I give it, a 6? I believe. And you're like, how did you? You're like, how did you give it that high a score?
It's like that thing is.
I agree. I totally agree.
Anyways, you're right though, but
it's kind of like there's a YouTuber, The Needle Drop, and he does album reviews. And sometimes he'll be like really harsh or something, and then he'll go and like 2 years later he'll re-listen to a project and give his adjusted rating. My adjusted rating would be a 3.
Yeah. No, but it's fair. I mean, it's. Yeah, I mean,
honestly,
dude,
the best rom-com you've ever seen, 6.5. Are you kidding?
Well, it's because I don't like the genre, so I have to.
Yeah, but it was such a good film.
but I dock it.
Yeah, and even you're like, this is one of my favorite films. I'm like, okay, 6.5.
I have to be objective. But no, this was a good discussion. Yeah, I mean, I guess to wrap up, I would say that like one thing I liked about this film, and I will say that it's more in the sense of like, not the director and stuff, but like this film, I think, does challenge the viewer in terms of their perceptions, I think, of race dynamics. Mm-hmm. And because there's just a lot of people who, I get it, I can't blame them because they don't think this way because they're 100%, Northern Indian or Han Chinese, right? So they don't even think about this, right? It's not their reality. And I think this film does well in trying to push you to think
I
of
would
like,
say yes and no, but go ahead. I'll let you finish.
well, I mean, in the sense of, well, okay, I'll let you chime in after, but like, but a lot of people just don't deal with these topics or think about this stuff, and I think this film does justice in that regard, and this let's say conversation space. You know, I think it adds to it. That's probably one of the best compliments I can give a film. So
I agree. I would say in the U.S. we have a complex history, and we're very, I would say, culturally and racially not homogenous, more heterogeneous. Whereas, like, you gave the example of like India and China, and while they don't have the same dynamics, they do have a lot of colorism dynamics, which this film kind of plays to. So, like within China and India, they both have more preferential views of people with lighter skin, and that really clouds a lot of their sort of cultural norms. So, while it's not quite the same, these dynamics do still play out there as well. Where they
yeah,
were,
they're
dude,
different.
in India for like Miss India, they
The
were
Brahmins
yeah, but
are always light.
well, also if you go like through northern India, because they're like India, like we might say India's homogenous. It's really not, because it's like 5,000 different ethnic groups and like tribal groups that were just pushed together, and that creates a lot of, they're somewhat homogenous, but they're pretty heterogeneous in many ways as well. But yeah, there was a big conflict because like Miss India one year was beautiful girl, but there were a lot of criticism from Indians saying that she was too dark. So yeah, they still have the same dynamics. You see this a lot with China. Like they do a lot of preventative measures to make sure that they maintain as light a skin as possible. A lot of that is just colorism that exists in many different cultures. That was pretty much my own point.
Yeah, I think that's a good good segue to end. So
Okay, well, sounds good. Yeah, if you enjoyed our commentary on this film, please like and subscribe to our channel. And also be sure to let us know any films that we should be reviewing. So give us any recommendations down in the comment section. And with that, we're out.